All right, Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sharif Al-Gindi. I am a senior in Georgetown, and I major in culture and politics. And I just want to start out and say that this week, Georgetown has been celebrating its annual Jesuit Heritage Week, which is a week where Georgetown's Jesuit values and heritage and identity has been celebrated. It is celebrated. Based on an ongoing tradition from main campus, Jesuit Heritage Week in Qatar provides a wonderful opportunity to explore our Georgetown identity in the context of a Middle Eastern location, and uniquely and a unique, diverse student body. This week has been filled with a wide variety of special events that celebrate the history of and identity of Georgetown. This year, we are delighted and honored to have our own Father Tom Michel here today to present the Jesuit Heritage Week Keynote 2016 Keynote address. This is a especially timely event as we celebrate Father Tom's 50th year as a Jesuit priest and his final year here at Georgetown, Qatar. Father Tom was born in St. Louis, USA in 1941 and joined the Jesuits in Jakarta, Indonesia in 1971. After studying Arabic and Islamic studies in Egypt and Lebanon, he received a doctorate from the University of Chicago in Islamic theology. Since then, his work and his efforts have been focused on Muslim-Christian relations in positions including the Vatican, many universities in the U.S., Rome, Turkey, and as well as his services in Thailand and Indonesia. He has received many awards, such as the International Shalabi Peace Prize from the Central Islamic Institute of Germany, the Building Bridges of Understanding Award from the Walid Center for Muslim-Christian Understanding at Georgetown. He is now teaching religious studies in the School of Foreign Service in Georgetown in Qatar, Doha. I just wanted to say a personal story about Father Tom. I met Father Tom when I was in sophomore year, and he had just first came. And one of the things that impressed me and really awed, I'm in awe, to be honest, but also ashamed of myself, because he knew more about Islam, which is my religion, than I did, which was every time he would say something that I wouldn't know, I would be wowed. Not that I'm very knowledgeable, but I guess I was still in that mind of a person that's not Muslim, how could he know that much? But I was still awed. And now I'm actually taking class. I'm taking this class, Muslim-Christian Relations, this semester. So, without further ado, please join me in welcoming to the stage Father Tom.
Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming to our keynote address this evening. Sally just was showing me this poster that they made in back, which is all true except for one thing. What did they do with my hair? Where did it go? There's real hair up there, but not visible. Anyway, I'd like to welcome you this evening to the keynote address. The purpose of this week is obvious. We're here to explore and celebrate the various aspects of the Jesuit vision in which we as faculty and staff and students and friends of Georgetown take part. In previous years, we've invited Jesuits from various parts of the world to come and tell us something about the work in which they are engaged. 2 years ago, we had Father Bambang from Indonesia speaking about the work of the Jesuit refugee service. Last year, Father Victor, a Syrian Jesuit, spoke about the work of the Society of Jesus in the Middle East, in Syria, Lebanon, and Egypt. And this year, Father Jerry Rosario explained his work with Dalits, our low-caste people in the Indian state of Tamil Nadu. In tonight's keynote, I've been asked to share with you some of the insights that I have gained from my almost 50 years of engaging in dialogue as a Christian living among and working with Muslims. From time to time, people want to know how Muslim-Christian dialogue fits into the life and mission of Jesuits. What's it all about? What is the purpose? Is it aimed at bringing Muslims into the Catholic Church, or does it have some other goal in mind? Well, a good starting point might be the statement of a general congregation of Jesuits from around the world that was held in the 1980s. Among other things, they set themselves the task of trying to sum up in one sentence what our whole Jesuit mission in this world is about. They wanted it brief and clear and yet comprehensive. And here's what they came up with. It's pretty good. It's only 16 words. Our mission, they said, is a service of faith that does justice in dialogue with religions and cultures. It's a service of faith that does justice in dialogue with religions and cultures. And in this formula, they tried to link and show the relationship between the 4 key elements of Jesuit identity today. First of all, it's a service of faith. As Jesuits, we are believers. We profess the Christian faith. All that we do stems from our desire to respond faithfully to God, who, according to what our faith teaches us, revealed himself to us in the life and message of Jesus. We want to live like Jesus. We want to follow his path in this world, and we want to make his values our own. But ours is not a faith that is separated from the realities of this world. It's a faith that seeks to do justice. This concern for justice leads us to involvement in the struggles of the victims of society's wrongs and prejudices and discriminations. It means that the defenseless, the marginalized, the refugees, and the victims of violence have first priority of our intentions. How to make society more attentive and responsive to the demands of justice remains an integral part of our Jesuit mission. But this is a task that we can't do alone. If our desire to transform society is to be effective at all, we find our natural partners in the believers of others' religions. We have some insights to offer, but we have to be ready to learn as well from the perceptions and the experiences of others. This is why ours is a mission that must be carried out in dialogue with the people of other religions. Finally, we Jesuits are an international body. We have no home base or dominant culture. All cultures possess valuable traditions and institutions and ways of relating that enhance human interaction. But no culture has all the answers. Each has part of the answer, and only by working together and learning from each other can the human endeavor move forward. So our Jesuit task is to immerse ourselves in the various cultures in which we live and work, to discover the humane and spiritual values that that culture has to offer. So this is what we mean by describing our Jesuit mission as a service of faith that does justice in dialogue with religions and cultures. Well, at this point, I'd like to get personal. In 1969, I think this is before any of my students were born, I was a young priest working in St. Louis in America, where I'm from. And my bishop got a request from a fellow bishop in Indonesia for somebody to teach English in a teacher's college there. So he sent me, and that's how I came to be living in the 1960s in Indonesia. Well, in short, I loved it there. I loved every minute of it. I didn't want to sleep because I would be missing something beautiful that I wanted to be doing. I loved the people. I loved the culture. I loved the natural beauty of the place. I loved the way of life there. I loved the work I was doing, and I felt that Indonesians had almost accepted me as one of themselves. So I joined the Jesuits in Indonesia. I wasn't a Jesuit before I went to Indonesia. And once I joined the Jesuits, my superior told me to ask around and learn what the needs were to discern what I would be doing in the future. So I asked various people who were in responsible positions in Indonesian society what they saw the needs to be. And I also mentioned to my students in the English class that I was teaching that I hoped to stay in Indonesia, but I didn't know how I might best be able to make a contribution to Indonesian society. Now, my students were mostly Muslims, as most of the people in Indonesia are Muslims, but some were Christians and some were Buddhists, and there were a couple of Hindus from Bali. Well, some of the Muslim students had an idea. Why don't you study Islam? They suggested. That way, you could help others come to a better understanding of Islam, and you could help Muslims come to know Christianity and other religions better. Well, the idea captured my imagination right away. And now, almost 50 years later, it's actually 47 years later, I can still recall that class. And I remember wondering at the time if my future would somehow be connected with this suggestion. I didn't know how this was such a new idea in my head. Well, but you know how sometimes a casual remark will settle in your brain and sort of take root and begin to grow? Well, in the weeks following, I spent a lot of time in my room and in the chapel with my copy of the documents of the Second Vatican Council. It was a nice, shiny new text, I remember, a paperback, because it had just been printed. This was only 4 years after the Second Vatican Council. So in this sense, I'm pretty much a product of the Second Council. But what I was doing is I was reading over and over again the passage about relations with Muslims. And if you've never read that passage, it's a good one. I encourage you to do so. It's just one long paragraph. And it starts out, the Catholic Church has great esteem for Muslims. Esteem. Not enmity, not suspicion, not even tolerance. Esteem. We should esteem Muslims. And I thought, we should? I had nothing against Muslims. I never met a Muslim in St. Louis before I went to Indonesia. But of course I met many in Indonesia. But I hadn't really given much thought about Islam. But as I continued to reflect on all of this, I began to get a glimmer of the direction that my life would take. I would study Islam and learn the reasons why we Christians should esteem Muslims. And then I would discover the ways in which I could communicate these grounds for esteem to my fellow Christians and to others. And this pretty much is what I've been doing for the past 47 years. About half the time I've been teaching Islamic studies in Christian institutes and in state universities in Indonesia, in the Philippines, in Italy, in the United States, and teaching Christian theology in Islamic institutions, again in Indonesia, in Turkey, in Malaysia, in Iran, and now here in Qatar. And what I've learned over the course of these years is that Christianity and Islam are two valid paths for responding to a loving and compassionate God. To hate each other, to regard one another as rivals or enemies to be overcome, is a distortion of our respective faiths and an insult to the God who loves us all. Instead, we are called to be partners in a common God-given task to fulfill in this world. Now, I'm not making this up. This is not just my own idea. The Second Vatican Council concludes its observations on Islam with the words, and here I'll quote it. Even though history has seen many conflicts and wars between Christians and Muslims, this council calls on all to move beyond the past, to work together for the common good, to build peace, to promote justice, to defend moral values, and to promote true human freedom. The Council envisions Muslims and Christians together, offering the world a common witness of God's will in 4 key areas of modern life: peace, justice, moral values, and human freedom. Now, I've found this to be a vision worth living for. It's a vision that has brought me into contact with so many inspiring Muslims and Christians down the years. And together, we've planned peace courses. We've organized family and village exchanges. We've held reconciliation seminars. We set up schools on small islands where education had previously never been available. We've put up Muslim refugees in churches when we couldn't find suitable housing for them. We've helped Muslim teachers and nurses erect free clinics in Christian villages where previously there were no health services. Our interfaith cooperation has enabled simple, practical projects to help fishermen, for example, bring their catch to the market, to found daycare centers for working mothers, to defend urban squatters from those who would take their homes, to rebuild homes and mosques after tsunamis and volcano eruptions, to defend religious and ethnic minorities and oppressed groups like bonded laborers. Most recently, we've been working to educate people about the biased generalizations made by Islamophobic preachers and politicians. But don't get me wrong, we didn't do all this ourselves. Not all those committed to human fellowship are Muslims and Christians. We worked together. We Muslims and Christians worked together with people of other religions and with those who did not identify with any religion. But our sincere Christian commitment and the Islamic commitment of my Muslim sisters and brothers were not compromised by our interfaith cooperation. Moreover, interfaith involvement is not a static way of life. One experience leads to another and opens doors to new spiritual paths. With Hindu colleagues, I've bathed in the Ganges, and I've studied the Bhagavad Gita. In recent years, at the invitation of the Muslim community in Mandalay in Myanmar, I've given courses on Islam to their Buddhist co-nationals. It hasn't been all positive, of course. Once when I was teaching in the southern Philippines, 4 young armed men with machine guns came and they stood in the back of the classroom and they said, "We want this foreigner to come with us." And I thought, oh my gosh, they want to kidnap me. But fortunately for me, there was a Muslim woman, Maranao woman, she was taking the course, and she turned around to them and spoke in Maranao, so I didn't understand exactly what she was saying. She was really giving it to them, and they sheepishly picked up their machine guns and backed out and took off. So we went on with class, and after class, I said to her, I said, "What did you say to them?" And she said, "I told them this was education and that they had no business being here and they should get out." And they did. So I was lucky. Now others were not so lucky. I have several personal friends, Jesuits and others, whose commitment to justice and dialogue cost them their lives. Among the many, many people who have died in the Syrian conflict in the recent years, two of them were fellow Jesuits. I also know a young Muslim stock clerk in Indonesia. He was the father of 2. He was only 26 years old. And he was one of hundreds of Muslim youths who volunteered to sweep the Christian churches for bombs after a bomb threat at Christmas in 1998. And when they did that, the Muslim youth organization, they said, "We'll sweep the churches. We'll make sure that there are no bombs so the Christians can come in without fear." And they did. But this young man actually found a bomb, and he was carefully removing it to the parking lot when the bomb exploded and he was killed. And the Christian community in that country regards him as a martyr, and rightfully so. But what is all this interfaith activity for? What's it supposed to achieve? Well, at one level, there's simply the value of being ourselves, of coming to know ourselves and to understand our faith better through interactions with companions of another faith and culture. We live and work in hope, trusting that God will make good use of our efforts. When I look back over my life and see how blessed I have been to come to know and to live with and to work with good Muslims and other believers, that gives me grounds for hope that my life also has been a blessing and an inspiration for those with whom I've lived. Another way to look at what's involved is that we are engaged in prevention of hatred and violence. Now, we know that with physical disease, it's far better to take measures beforehand to prevent the disease from ever occurring than to wait and try to cure it afterwards. For example, it's better to stop smoking now so as not to develop lung cancer than to try later on to cure it with chemotherapy. Well, similarly, it's better to build bonds of solidarity and friendship among people of different religions before violence and strife occurs than waiting to pick up the pieces afterwards in reconstruction, rehabilitation, and reconciliation. But most of all, for me, it's a matter of what we want to say with our lives. A theme of this Heritage Week has been, "My life is a message." Several of our activities had that as a title. What is the message that I want to say to myself, first of all, and to others around me? What's the message of my life? What's the message that I want to leave behind for coming generations? For me, I hold that life is better. Life is richer when I believe that there is a compassionate, loving God who is at the heart of the universe and at the heart of human experience. This gives me strength. It gives me a direction for my activities. It gives me a sense of hope when I look to the future. Now, I find this sense of direction, this divine presence, in my Christian faith. But I see it also in the Islamic faith, professed by so many of my Muslim brothers and sisters. I think that our faith in the active presence of God in every aspect of society and daily life is the most valuable contribution that we offer to modern people who live in a world where the divine is often sidelined or pushed to the margins of our consciousness. As more and more people abandon religion and belief in God as ideas incompatible with scientific thought, or simply as a relic from pre-modern times, Muslims and Christians must realize how much greater is what we share than the elements of dogma that divide us. The fundamental question remains, is there anything outside the universe? Is there something or someone that is not scientifically measurable? And to this, Muslims and Christians, with surprising unanimity, affirm the existence of a good and loving God who has produced the world as a thing of beauty, who has destined humans for eternal happiness, who has taught people to live according to ethical norms. This belief is our common Abrahamic heritage, uniting Christians and Muslims, as well as Jews, in a vision of a universe that is, I believe, both warmer and more hopeful than the rather chilly mechanism of scientific cosmology and particle physics. The two visions, the religious and the scientific, cannot, of course, be contradictory. The Big Bang and creation must refer to the same chain of events. The scientist's contribution is invaluable, and yet the world still needs to hear the story told from a faith perspective. But Muslims and Christians cannot give credible witness to this religious vision unless they are united in mutual respect and esteem. If they feel they must fight out every disagreement and seek to dominate the other economically, politically, intellectually, their jointly held view of the universe as the product of a merciful and compassionate God will be dismissed as divisive, belligerent ideology that human society is better off without. In other words, in working to build harmony between the two communities, our very credibility is at stake. The message that we see as giving direction to our lives can only respond to the spiritual needs of people today if it is a message of peace. This conviction that has motivated my work for the past 47 years has not dimmed with time, but is, if anything, stronger today than before. I can only believe in a God whose love and mercy and forgiveness are not limited to any group of people or any exclusive community of believers. Obviously, there are matters on which we disagree, and we can't ignore them or sweep them away. But they need not be grounds for enmity. In this context, I remember the wise words of the Quran, which says, "To God you are all returning. At that time, you will be informed of those things about which you disagreed." See, we don't have to fight out these questions here and now, because one day, and this is my deepest hope, one day the truth will become clear to us all. Thank you.